of Environmental Biology Online. This week we're going to look at the way energy structures community. So far we've been looking at the way energy structures trophic levels in an ecosystem, and we're going to scale that back to look at the community and the way the community is structured. And community structure has to do with the diversity of the community, how many different species are in that community, and also with how big are the individual populations of the different species. And you're going to use the Simutext chapter to get some background information on it. So this time we're going to look at the Community Dynamics chapter in Simutext, and you're not going to read the whole chapter. I want you to focus on sections 2 and 3. So please first read the introduction to the chapter, because it'll give you some background about Yellowstone and talk about some of the species that are there. And then focus on just sections 2 and section 3. Please answer all the questions, do your best, and you'll just learn how individual species can have a big effect on the whole community. It's pretty interesting. You'll also get information by reading chapter 12 in Critcher's book, so taking it from the top. And in this case, he's looking at top-down trophic cascades and bottom-up trophic cascades.
Trophic cascade is something that happens when there is a change in one part of the community, but there is an effect on multiple trophic levels. There's a cascade of effects.
And then we'll have a discussion, just like always. So I have a number of questions. Please pick a question that nobody else has answered. So when you go to select your question, just scan through all the ones that have been answered and pick one that no one else has, so we can talk about a wide variety of topics. Know that the more you participate in the discussion, the more you'll learn. There's no home base for this week. That one, you turned in the home base for the energy unit already, but we will discuss that this week, so you'll have a chance to read each other's posts and make some sort of comment. The big thing that you're going to work on this week is the lab. So the lab is in the Simutext package. So when you open Simutext, just like you would for a chapter,
I'm going to click on the Keystone Predator Lab. When you do that, it will prompt you to download the workbook. Please do that, because you have to have the workbook to understand the directions and how to go about doing the whole lab.
So when you go through the workbook, it's going to give background information, which I definitely recommend reading, and then it will give very specific detailed directions about what to do. So read the directions really carefully, follow them specifically, and then you'll also notice that there's spaces in the workbook where you can write things down. But know that I'm not going to be collecting that workbook, so it's a place for you to take notes and keep track of your progress. The other thing you need to print is in our Moodle website, and it's the lab guide. So I create a lab guide for every lab, which you've already seen, and this tells you what I want you to turn in. I don't want you to turn in answers to every question in the lab. It's just too tedious for you and for me. So I've selected the questions that are most important, and I've created an outline of that. So you're going to write 2 reports, and in these reports you're writing to the Washington Department of Fish and Game, and I want you to imagine that you are a tide pool ecologist. So as you're writing up your reports, write as though you're an ecologist writing to the Washington Department of Fish and Game. So don't include things like, I opened the simulation and I clicked on this button. No, instead, write as though you were in the field collecting data, examining the community. The first report is basically a summary of the first several sections of the lab, and I've given a very detailed outline of what should be included there, and it references all the specific questions, so you'll know exactly where to get the information that I'm looking for. I think it will probably work well to put a lot of that information in tables and figures. Tables and figures just display a lot of information really quickly, really simply. So when you add tables and figures, make sure that each one has a complete caption. So complete caption starts with table 1 or figure 1, a colon, and then describes all the variables in that table. So it might be table 1, description of the creatures in the intertidal zone. And in that description, you'll list if it's sessile or not, if it's an echinoderm, if it's a mollusk, things like that.
So a couple of important things to note. You're going to be looking at the competitive dominance hierarchy and at the food web. Those two things are different.
The competitive dominance hierarchy only refers to the sessile organisms in the tide pool. These are the organisms that can't move. So their most important resource is space in the tide pool. So they're competing for that very effective, some are less effective, and I want you to rank all 5 of those organisms. So make sure you really competitive dominance hierarchy. None of those organisms eat each other, so remember that. The food web talks about the organisms that eat each other. So the food web includes the mobile consumers, and they're eating some of the sessile consumers. The sessile consumers all eat plankton, or they're photosynthesizers. So plankton is just small microbits of particles in the water, and if you'd like to add plankton into your food web, I definitely recommend it. But know that those sessile consumers are not eating any of the mobile consumers. So that keep the competitive dominance hierarchy separate from the food web. There are different concepts. Okay, so your report 1 is going to talk about the competitive dominance hierarchy, the food web, and it's also going to go through the removal and reintroduction experiments that you do in the tide pool. And you'll just describe everything that you did and give your recommendations. And that will be report number 1. In report number 2, I'd like you to try the lab report format. Now I've given an outline of that, and I'd like you to just follow the outline. So the introduction to the lab report always just gives background information, and then it explains the purpose of your work. And in this case, we're investigating the effect of an invasive species. The next section is the methods. That describes exactly what we did. We practiced experimental design for the last couple of weeks. So it's just very simply, what did you discover? So you're going to share your data, you're going to share figures and or tables. The last section of the lab report is the conclusion. So this is just, well, what does it all mean? And I've asked a couple of questions to have you go a little bit deeper and ask you to apply this information that you're learning about this tide pool to other ecosystems. What happens potentially if an invasive species ends up in one of those other ecosystems?